Welcome all to the Times Higher Education webinar, Safeguarding the Academic Experience, Building Cyber Resilience in Higher Education, held in partnership with NCC Group. My name is Sritu. I'm the Deputy Editor for Branded Content at THE. Disruptions to the academic journey can stop students from being able to fully participate and excel in their studies. This makes it crucial for institutions to prioritize the stability and reliability of their digital infrastructure. As cyber threats become more sophisticated, universities must adopt a strong cybersecurity strategy to protect their data and the quality of the academic experience. Leveraging industry solutions can be one part of the solution, but educating stakeholders on best practice will be key to building a culture of resilience. Today, we're joined by a great panel of experts who will talk to us about the evolving threats and the importance of a proactive cybersecurity strategy in protecting your institution. Before we get started, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded. We'll share an on-demand video and a summary article with all the participants after the webinar. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you would like to ask the panel. Before we jump into the conversation, I'm sure our participants would love to hear more about our panelists. So let's start with some quick introductions. Tim, could we start with you?
Of course, Rita, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tim Rawlins. I'm a director and senior advisor for NCC Group, and I play a role particularly around our crisis management. So I've worked with a number of universities who've gone through major cybersecurity incidents, helping them recover from or manage their way through a cyber crisis. I also deliver training to those organizations and have worked with universities and other colleges across the UK and more widely. Thank you.
Thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Matt Hull. I'm the Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at NCC Group. So I look after a team of analysts that work globally to help understand what the cyber threats are. So what the threats to organizations are, who are launching attacks, how are they launching those attacks, and how we can potentially defend against those attacks. So yeah, looking forward to speaking today about the issues with higher education.
Thank you. And Natalie, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the NCC Group?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. And hello to everybody who's joined us today. I'm VP of the Managed Services portfolio. So I look after the part of our business where we tend to help our clients with their managed services, whether it's SOC services or vulnerability services. And I also have a sort of dual hat. So I look after our global partnerships. So that's where we work with a technical alliance who's a specialist in the field in order to offer a service to our clients. But yeah, I can introduce NCC Group. So if you've not heard about us before, we're a global organisation. Typically today we've got three of us from the UK, but actually we've got a significant presence in the UK, in the EU, in North America, and also in the APAC region, very broadly in the APAC. I know it's a big region, but particularly Australia and the Philippines, to name two. Our capabilities, which you've had a little bit of a sense of from the three of us, they span from anything like technical assurance, which could be pen testing, incident response and the forensics around incident response, consulting, threat intelligence, and then obviously the area I sit in, which is that managed security services. We advise governments and regulatory bodies, so we do a number of those sorts of things on the matters of cybersecurity. And we work with multiple sectors across the private and public sectors, but we do have a lot of experience, particularly in the education sector, including universities and higher education organisations. So I'm hoping some of that is of use when we get into this webinar.
Great, thank you. We want this to be an interactive discussion. So in addition to the Q&A, I will also be launching a number of polls throughout our conversation. And we would love to have your input on the topics we'll be discussing. So to get our conversation started, you'll now see a poll pop up on your screen. This will give us a quick glance at the cybersecurity practices at your institutions. You will have 1 minute to pick the option that best matches your institution's approach.
I think whilst we wait for the poll results, we might comment that we really do see a wide variety of testing by our clients. Some who do that very basic request to us to come in and penetration test a particular app, a particular machine, a particular system or process, all the way through to the regulatory led. So whether that's within the education world, which is regulated, but more likely within some of those areas of critical national infrastructure, where we expect the regulators to really focus on intelligence-led penetration testing. So the work that Matt's team does then enables us to really tailor the attack to the actual threats that those sorts of organizations are facing and are led by the regulator. And it's certainly very busy. Oh, some interesting results.
Yeah, you should now be able to see how our participants responded. Thank you all for recording your responses, and I think that sets up the stage nicely for our first topic. I want to start with the evolving landscape of threats and the challenges that institutions are facing at the moment. So what evolving cyber threats are we seeing, and what does this mean in terms of the challenges that universities are facing?
Yeah, I think I'll pick this one up. It's in my job title, so there we go. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, and just by virtue of just giving a bit of an overview of what we mean by cyber threats and how we assess them here at NCC Group. So the measure of threat is about the capabilities of certain actors to do things, so what skills and techniques and tools that they have, but also their motivations, their objectives. So what things are they looking to target? Where are the crown jewels, and what types of information are looking to be targeted? And then the final part is about the opportunity to target an organization. So is it vulnerable in one way or another, or does it have a large attack surface, for example? Is it spread globally? Does it have lots of endpoints that we can target? So when we look at all three of those things, so the opportunity, the motivation, and the capability, that's how we assess these threats. And higher education and education in general, in fact, represents quite an attractive target to various threat groups when we consider those three areas. So just to give you an idea of some of the stats, first of all, around what the threat landscape looks like. So there's some research and surveys that we did last year. 97%. That's not a mistake. 97% of higher education institutes reported some form of breach or cyber attack in the last 12 months. So it's quite a high number there. Of those, 60% suffered some form of negative impact. So that's some sort of operational downtime, data loss, or similar. And then also in some of the ransomware work we're doing, obviously can't talk about cyber threats without mentioning ransomware. So in 2024, this is hot off the press. We haven't even released this data to our sort of wider client base yet. But in 2024, higher education and educational establishments were the sixth most targeted sector by ransomware actors last year. So that's in the context of governments, which were lower down the table. It's talking about IT organizations, manufacturers, and such like. So paints a little bit of a picture about, well, actually, this is quite an attractive sector to target by a group of different threat actors. So I'll stick first of all with the cyber criminals element. So organized crime, should we say? So organized criminals, what is their motivation? Their motivation is money. They want to steal as much, or they want to make as much money as they can. And when we talk about the capabilities of cyber threat actors, it's very varied, but actually their prime goal is money. What we're seeing in the threat landscape at the moment is cyber criminals trying to make money by extorting their victims, and ransomware is the way that that's happening. So ransomware has evolved quite dramatically over the last few years. There was obviously a big focus on encryption to start with, the actual availability of data and the disruption there. But what we've seen certainly over the last 12 to 18 months is a gradual shift to stealing of data and then using that data as leverage for extortions. Why is that important to higher education? Well, you have lots of data. You have lots of intellectual property. You've got details about students. There's financial information. All of that stuff is right at the top of the list when it comes to cyber criminal commodities. That is the sort of stuff that the bad guys want to go after and then hold that as leverage against you. And we've seen loads of examples of educational establishments being targeted by ransomware groups over the last 12 months and way beyond that. Then there's also the targeting by nation states. Now, you might wonder, well, why would a nation state, why would a foreign intelligence service want to attack a university? Well, we've seen examples of it, and it happens all of the time, because one of the key motivations of a nation state would be the theft of intellectual property, espionage, and also leveraging intelligence about individuals and the movements of those individuals as well. And we get a lot of international students, don't we, moving from universities, moving to different countries. Some of those people might be of interest to a foreign intelligence service. So we do see targeting of higher education by nation states, and the motivation of which is as I've just described. But we've also seen lots of examples of targeting of universities that are involved in research. A real good example of this was not too long ago, distant memory for some, but still etched into our hearts for others, was around COVID. So we know that when the COVID vaccines were being generated, and there was a lot of research going on globally, in collaboration with private industry, pharmaceutical companies and universities, Iran was interested in a lot of that research. And we saw a lot of targeted activity by Iranian advanced persistent threat groups targeting universities, trying to steal that sort of data as well. And then, I guess, in sort of broader threats, universities represent a really interesting target because of that opportunity that the bad guys have. So I've already mentioned the motivations and the capability of different groups. Criminal groups have got the capability and the intent. Nation states have got the capability and intent. And the opportunity part is because there are lots of universities. There are lots of students going to these universities, bringing their own laptops, bringing their own mobile phones, connecting to Wi-Fi within education establishments, in some cases connecting and potentially being part of the actual operational infrastructure within a university. So there's a sprawling estate of potential digital targets that are associated with universities. So it makes it very easy for them to be targeted. And when you introduce large numbers of people into these types of environment, you also introduce opportunities for bad guys to social engineer or to target devices. So, for example, we're seeing an awful lot of activity in the info stealer space. So info stealers are a type of malware that sit on our mobile phones, they sit on our laptops, and they look at what websites we're visiting. They look at our usernames, our passwords, our PIN numbers, and all of that information is being harvested and then sold in forums and marketplaces on the dark web. And we know a lot of that information is then used to launch other attacks. So I could talk about this for days because it's what I enjoy. I get a bit of a buzz off it, but that's where I'll stop. You know, just to put it into perspective, the threat to higher educational establishments is up there. We've seen it through different attacks. We've seen constant examples of different types of threat actors targeting higher education. And I think we're probably going to get into the weeds of it, but those sprawling estates that we're talking about and students coming in, that's not going to change anytime soon. If anything, it's going to increase as more students and universities implement remote type working, remote learning and such like. I hope that gives a bit of a picture of the world we're living in.
We mustn't forget the staff, although Matt's very much focused on the students. The staff themselves, both academic and non-academic, present an interesting challenge, given that their rights of academic freedom sometimes makes them reluctant to follow university policies and procedures, and we quite often discover that individuals have gone out and procured additional bits of IT, that so-called shadow IT, which they then bring into the systems, into the networks, that they've procured as part of a grant, as part of a personal, departmental or an organizational procurement process that sits outside of the regular IT-controlled procurement process. And it's those systems that often are part of that weak link, part of that vulnerability of any network or system within a university to really cause us a problem. We've certainly seen that in a number of the cases where we've been responding as a mature cybersecurity incident response capability.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think there's also a general expectation of knowledge share, because that is, if you're a researcher, that's absolutely your reason for being. So then that mindset of being cautious about what you share and who you share it with, because it may have value beyond what you see, is hugely important. The other thing I was thinking, just as you were talking, is just that complete range of complexity, whether you're talking about purely an academic environment or you touch a little bit on the OT and the fact that you actually could be a teaching hospital still within an education environment, and then suddenly you're into a whole different world of machinery and securing that, which is very, very different from securing kind of an IT, a laptop and a server, for example.
Yeah, the connection of laptops and computers to laboratory equipment has been the way into a number of organizations, particularly because those are not generally managed by IT. They're not generally managed full stop. They're not patched, they're not maintained, they're not kept up to date. And in some cases, because they're tied to a piece of laboratory equipment, sometimes even fully embedded in that equipment, they're enormously difficult to maintain. Really, really challenging.
As we're speaking about digital infrastructure and given the challenges of balancing limited budgets and the lack of in-house resources and skills, what strategies do you think institutions can use to, first of all, optimize resources, resource allocation and utilization when it comes to cybersecurity tools and resources?
Let me pick up on that for a second, because the systems and processes that are out there, the challenges around budget, can also be reflected in the policies that the organization has that are not being followed. So one of the big things, one of the ways that you could really make a significant difference to your cybersecurity is actually to follow your data retention policy. Now, most organizations have a data retention policy, but when I've asked university boards, I've asked senior leadership teams, how many of them have read that policy? I get very few hands. How many of them remember the policy, even if they've read it? I get very few hands. And what it means is the universities are storing vast amounts of data that they really shouldn't be holding. And that storage of the data that they shouldn't have, they don't need, they haven't gone through and redacted, they haven't gone through and followed their own processes, presents a huge amount of information at risk. So we might say that as a cybersecurity firm, we would recommend lots of cybersecurity. Of course we do, but actually there are really simple, practical processes that you can follow that will set you up for success. And I would strongly recommend doing things like looking at your data retention policies and then following your business continuity policies, updating those. Most business continuity policies are predicated on a 4-hour return to operation. Now, we know that if you are hit with a major ransomware attack, don't think about 4 hours. Start thinking about 4 days of complete chaos, 4 weeks of really intensive work with a forensic firm like us coming in and working alongside you to try and establish exactly what happened and help you recover. And a long tail of dealing with your stakeholders that may take months and months. 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months is the simple formula that we use. That's even before you start to do all of the good things around cyber hygiene, the good things around using MFA, the good things around just getting the basics right. And the monitoring that Natalie and her team provide are really key, because the attacks that Matt's looking at and the attackers, they don't operate in the time zone when your IT staff are sitting at their desks. So actually the ability to monitor your network out of hours is absolutely essential.
And the key there really is to minimize the downtime, so you contain it as early as you can, so that the smallest number of users, servers, whatever, are impacted, because A, you're doing that 24/7, and B, you're doing that in lots of different ways ideally, so that you can catch that attack earlier on. I also noticed your commentary of like a practical advice, because practical is just the name of the game, because you just got to think of the humans and the human element of it. I always think back to the, not that I've ever done this, of course, but that if your company doesn't allow you to print directly from your laptop or connect to a printer, so you obviously email your home email and print it at home, which is what you're trying to avoid. If you're not considering that the end user's behaviours and their day job and their operational environment, then people will naturally find a way around it, not because they're trying to do something that isn't secure, but just because it's practical. So it's ease of operations and ease of security that's absolutely key. It's all got to be material and all sort of relevant to the impact.
Before we go into the benefits of taking a proactive approach to cybersecurity, I will launch another poll to get a sense of participants' approach to security monitoring. Again, you will have 1 minute to record your responses.
I think this one's going to be an interesting one, because we are being approached more and more to take on that out of hours monitoring capability. A lot of organizations and the universities themselves find it extraordinarily difficult to recruit and maintain a 24/7 capability. It's just not practical for most of the organizations to do that. And so they turn to organizations such as ours to provide that capability. And I think that's absolutely key. Just seeing the results of that, do you have 24 hours monitoring? No, office hours only for 63%. And only one of the respondents saying that they've actually got their own capability. So even where we've seen organizations with their own capability, they still sometimes struggle given the scale that they need to operate at. And what we can do is to resource that to provide additional first line and second line and third line response to the organizations, even if they've got their own capability.
Thank you. When we look at the broader impact of cybersecurity on higher education, one critical aspect is minimizing disruptions. So how can institutions navigate this challenge to protect the academic journey, but also safeguard their reputation? And how can implementing proactive cyber threat management help?
I think that's one for Matt, isn't it? Proactive cyber threat.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, isn't it? So Natalie and I mean, I'm just going to use the terms threat-led. So we can't do everything. We can't monitor everything necessarily. We can't keep our eye on everything. So having a good understanding and awareness of what your threat is, what the threats might be facing you, is a good way to start, because that will help prioritize some of that risk management and some of the decision making that needs to take place in the organization. But equally, when it comes into Natalie's world and the monitoring and detection of those things, knowing how the bad actors operate. So what's their modus operandi? What are the tools and techniques that they use? What are the indicators of those potential attacks? And the way we found that stuff out is through our incident response work, which Tim sort of alluded to, previous learned events, also what's going on in the public domain. So that combination of open source intelligence and also closed source intelligence, we feed that into our SOC environments, and that helps us then set up detection alerts, detection logic, which enables us to monitor for the right things at the right time. But also it means that we can threat hunt. So if we know an attack has taken place against a higher education establishment and it took this in phase, this sort of through phase and this out phase, so what that path looked like from the attack, we can almost replay that in a threat hunting, in a safe threat hunting way within the environment. And I'm not sure, but we might come onto it, and it was mentioned in the first poll, but those threat-led simulated attacks are also really useful. And it doesn't need to be full red team, so i.e. the organization doesn't know they're being attacked by a company like us. It can be done in a collaborative way, so we can actually do those threat hunted simulated attacks where our attackers, our pen testers, are attacking alongside the SOC, so the people that are working in those security operations centers. So we can really see, well, how do we get in, but how do we block those things at the right time? So Natalie, I hope I haven't stole too much of what you were going to say, but
yeah, there's a strong correlation, isn't there? But yeah, I always think of it sort of in two halves. There's the proactive aspect, which you've touched on a few of the tools and techniques like pen testing and what have you, but you can go a little bit further. So you absolutely can start to look at where your assets are. Are there internet facing assets that you're not aware of? I mean, Tim gave some examples. Absolutely, it's very, very tempting to procure things for projects, and you might be completely legitimate to do that. But if you can't protect what you can't see. So if you don't know where they are, then that is potentially a vulnerability that's ready to be exploited. So I guess for me, that first half of proactive is depending on your cyber maturity, think about some scanning, think about looking for where your vulnerabilities might be that you're not aware of, and prioritize them. You can't fix everything at one time, so you'll probably want to look at that, taking the context, taking perhaps the sector specific threat intel that your team provide, and look at that holistically and say, right, where's my next biggest problem? What do I want to solve? So that's that kind of one chunk of proactive vulnerability scanning, attack surface management, those types of things. The other half then dips back into the monitoring, and it's still proactive in that sense, because you're monitoring to proactively prevent something from happening, or indeed if it does, to catch it really early. So the key is, in an ideal world, that's 24/7, because the attackers don't come along between 9 and 5 just for our convenience, of course. But actually, it's selecting the tooling that's appropriate for the organisation's cyber maturity. So you don't have to do everything together at once. It might be absolutely appropriate to start with some kind of endpoint protection for the staff, or you might think that actually a particular organisation within your faculty, within your university is a higher priority. So the key is you can layer these tools in depending on where your area of risk is and what your budget is and your maturity. Also, people like ourselves can look across and think, hey, we can advise based on what we've typically seen an organisation in your particular sector doing, or where they've gone to next. If and when sort of budget arrives, or you're feeling kind of a little bit more vulnerable because of the threat landscape, hey, let's just invest somewhere else. So it's layering those tools and techniques and still being proactive and making sure that then, should an incident arise, we catch it early, we intervene, and then coming back to the experience for the user, students or staff alike, it's minimizing the downtime. So contain it at the earliest possible stage and restrict that to the fewest number of users. And the rest can carry on, and then obviously you bring in the relevant expertise to revisit and to improve. So groups.
I think just that the aspect of that training for those events is again being proactive. The getting the teams all the way from the gold team, the senior executive team, the silver team who are going to deliver the tactics and the resources necessary, and then the bronze teams using the classic business continuity, gold, silver, and bronze. But getting them trained is part of being proactive, getting them ready to deal with it, helping build some of that muscle memory, some of that experience, some of that knowledge of how you're going to deal with it. At the gold level, we see the organizations really need to be focused on strategic direction, the approval of the approval of communications, and senior stakeholder management. If we can get the gold team to be focused on those three things, and then we can get the different bronze teams, the bronze security, the bronze communications, bronze HR, the bronze student management, those different teams to be thinking and planning to deal with this, it puts you in a much, much better position. It really does help you be proactive, do that thinking in advance, take some of the decisions, figure out what your priorities for restoration are, because it will vary. It'll vary depending on the time in the calendar, depending on what term you're in, what part of that term, whether you're just about to go into clearing, just about to take on a new batch of students, just about to hit exams. All of those different periods of time need a slightly different response. Being proactive means that you've thought through what those responses are and you've exercised them. And that really, really does make a difference to helping your organization get ready and dealing with the crisis when it hits.
And I'm also curious how that translates to positive benefits on the student journey in terms of student well-being and success. We'll talk more about awareness in a minute, but how does creating a secure digital environment help students have an overall positive experience at their institutions?
A lot of it comes down to reputation. A lot of it comes down to that if you are at an organization that has had a major data breach, that is felt personally by the people whose data has been compromised. It's visceral, there's a stress involved. So if we can ensure that the student journey is as easy as possible, where the IT and the team and the security team have thought about making it easy to do the right thing. If you can make that journey of signing in or acquiring a new account, signing in, operating day-to-day, printing, storing, doing virtual learning, all of those things that the student is going to need to do in their environment, you can map all of that. You can see what data is going to be required. You can see what access is going to be required. And by making it easy to do the right thing, you are thinking about how can I enable that student journey? How can I make sure that they're ready? How can I make sure that when it comes at a time when they want to print something, that it's easy for them to print it? Rather than to Natalie's example, and Natalie, you've gone a bit blurred. Oh, you're back again. Yeah. Rather than to Natalie's example, where she said, having to email it to another account in order to print it out. What a dreadful process that is. Make it easy to do the right thing. It helps that student journey. And we've got to think about the knowledge and experience that they need to develop and grow. A lot of these students now, they're digitally native. They've always used systems. They've always used processes. They expect it to work. It's our responsibility to expect it to work safely and securely in a resilient manner. The resilience, that ability to survive and thrive a major incident, is really that case where you've had a problem. We're always going to have a problem, but you've responded well. You've reduced the impact on the student body. You've followed your data retention policies as an organization, so there's information about that student has been limited. It's not as detailed as it might be. And then the process that they've gone through has been supportive and helping. Let's make it a good journey for them. Let's help them be confident in the organization by delivering the right thing for them.
Thank you. I'll just launch another poll to get a sense of the participants' experiences over the past couple of years to see just how cybersecurity risks impact institutions. So please take a moment to respond. And while you're recording your responses, I would like to get the panelists' take on educating stakeholders about these risks. So how can we better raise awareness of cybersecurity and educate staff and students to make sure that they can recognize potential risks and be vigilant?
Matt, you're on mute.
I am on mute. I don't mind. You want me to kick this one off, but so I'm regularly asked to speak to, and Tim and Natalie both are as well, to speak to senior people within an organization, within the IT environment. So one of the key things is to get people within the organization, senior management, to buy into the fact that cybersecurity is important. It's part of the overall resilience and operationalization of the business that we're talking about. And yes, there are cyber threats everywhere, and to a degree, people are fatigued by the talk of cyber this, cyber that, cyber bad guys, and what have you. But it is part of our day-to-day resilience that we need to bake in to everything that we do. So just making people aware that this is, and to coin I think it's the Bank of England, someone at the Bank of England talked about disruption as usual. Cyber is going to be one of those things that disrupts an organization potentially. I've not seen the poll results yet, but I know through other surveys that attacks are coming in left, right, and centre to higher education, and they're going to keep on coming in. So it's a case of being able to be aware of that and why they're happening in the first place. And then I guess there's the user piece as well, the individuals. We of all, as individuals, have a part to play in protecting the organisations that we're part of, whether it be an academic, a student, or whoever. And many people will say, well, who's interested in me? Why would a nation state want to target and hack me? Well, they might not directly, but they might want to with a view to targeting the organisation that you're part of, or be part of a wider attack as well. So yeah, it's kind of two-pronged. Just understanding that this is going to happen, and we need to understand that it's part of general resilience. But also, as an individual, we've got a responsibility to have a decent degree of cyber hygiene and cyber awareness to limit and mitigate the potential risks to a wider organisation.
And I think it's fair to say there isn't just one technique, is there? It's a combination, no. And it's continual, and it'll depend on the community, but different types of training delivered in different ways, webinars, simulations, all of those things, even things like certification and compliance and those type of things play into this space. So it's using any and all resources, and I guess particularly for universities, where if you happen to have those specific skills in your organisation, it's leveraging those as well, isn't it? Which is perhaps a little bit different from other business settings where they might not have that expertise. So it's just continuing to change the message so that a different thing catches a different community, a different organisation, different part of the organisation rather. So.
And I've personally briefed college boards, university boards, but also the assemblies, where the colleges have pulled together all of their staff to provide briefings to them. And we talk very much around your life, your business, because a lot of what we're talking about is things that you can do in your personal life that will then have an impact on your corporate life and vice versa. So if the organization is offering a password manager, well, excellent, good practice. What about for their personal life? So thinking about the good things that you can do, the advice that teams on the ground can be offering. One of the areas that we've tried to deliver is upskilling the local teams, the IT help desks, those sorts of people, so that they've got security knowledge, so that when they're talking, when they're helping students and staff set their systems up, that they're dropping in security advice all of the time, just so it becomes business as usual. And that's one of those changes. We need this to be tone of a good security culture being set from the top, but then we've got to make it clear that it's everybody's responsibility. Security doesn't work without you is one of those sort of cliched phrases, but it's absolutely true. Everybody has that responsibility. Now, trying to remind people, jog, nudge, whatever it takes to get people to think about it, because it's not going to be forefront of their mind. It's not the thing that they wake up thinking and dreaming about in the same way that, unfortunately, for all of us, it is. But it's trying to make it real for them, trying to help people understand. And it takes time, but it takes constant repetition until it just becomes ingrained, until it becomes business as usual. It's a constant struggle.
You mentioned the importance of right messaging and transparent communication in driving an institution-wide culture of cyber resilience. Could you speak a little bit more about effective communication and some of the strategies institutions can use to improve cybersecurity awareness and engagement among staff and students?
To Natalie's point, you've got to use a wide variety of tools, a wide variety of methods, wide variety of, having cybersecurity on the agenda. It almost doesn't matter what the meeting is, stick it in as on the agenda. It's this in the same way that we saw health and safety become just an agenda item for so many meetings. Cybersecurity, cyber resilience might be a better word. It makes people less sort of twitchy if we can talk about resilience rather than security. Then use that, and it comes down to all sorts of little things. So a lot of organizations will add a banner into an email. incoming email that goes, this email has come in from an external source. Just take care before clicking on a link. Think about, what is it? Who do you know who it's from? Well, those sorts of little nudges, in the moment learning opportunities, in the moment reminders, are just one way of trying to get that message across. But then it does become that every method, that every technology, the posters on the walls that are regularly changed, they're not 2 years old, dull and dusted. The opportunity for the security teams in all of those organizations to get out and talk to the boards, the committees, the meetings, the assemblies, having open days, having the lunch and learns, setting up a desk in the canteen, whatever it takes. Getting that message is a constant, as I said before, it's a constant struggle, but it really does need to be done. And if we can make them more secure as an individual with good habits, those carry across from their personal life into their corporate life, into their academic life.
That was an interesting extra word there. Oh, go on.
No, after you, please, Natalie, go on.
No, I just noticed the word in the question, the transparency as well, which I think is really key. It's about creating that culture where it's okay to ask for help. There's this transparent view, hey, I've got the server under the desk, it might not have software or whatever. You've got to create that, and that's led from the top, from within, because that way then you create that culture of assistance and getting that kind of protection that you need.
Kind of beautifully tangent into both your points is that blame culture. I think historically there's been a blame culture, hasn't there, about cyber incidents, or, oh, I've clicked that link and now I've caused a cyber incident or whatever. But leveraging good, for example, social engineering or phishing simulations, things like that, really helps drive, well, because we know phishing is getting a lot harder to spot and detect, right? But if someone fails one of those sorts of tests or does fall foul of an incident of some sort, we shouldn't be blaming them. These things are designed to trick us as people. So actually being able to be open about, I've made a mistake here, or I have circumnavigated that control in some way, just to make my life easier. Let's not beat people up about it. Let's just be, transparent. Let's be, exactly.
It comes back that make it easy to do the right thing. Having a button on your university or college's intranet going, report an incident. Simple, easy to put in place. Every organization has its own intranet. Add it there permanently, change the color on it every so often so it catches the eye. These little things that can make such a significant difference in raising awareness, establishing that security culture, that no blame security culture, as Matt's point.
We are almost at the end of our panel discussion. We'll move on to the Q&A soon. But before that, I have now launched our final poll for today to move our conversation to preparedness and long-term planning. You should now be able to see the question pop up on your screen. And I will wait for you to provide your responses. And the final topic we have for today is how can industry solutions enhance security and streamline processes to maintain compliance with regulatory standards?
Natalie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the partners that we work with, for example?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting starting point because there's always this trade-off between, do you just pick one solution or the minimum number of solutions to meet your needs, you back that, and then you get that certain capability. I think in practice, that is in bigger organizations, that's practically impossible, but there's obviously a trade-off with then selecting the vast selection of tooling that you could do. So there's a balance in the middle that's helpful. I personally don't believe in just backing one partner. I just think if we'd have done that 5 years ago, then that wouldn't have been the right one today. So there is an element of backing a multiple. I'm just getting a little scan of the, no, okay, that's more balanced as a response than I was, I guess, expecting. Don't know if, but yeah, so I think it's select the amount of tooling. A partner like us, for example, we'll look at a number of different capability. We'll look at a suite across from, as I alluded to at the start, kind of endpoint network, things like canary tokens that sort of work as a honeypot. So a broad range, and then it's up to the client to select what is appropriate for their cyber maturity, their stage in their journey, their particular risk appetite and their environment. So for me, it really is about choice, and then we balance that kind of enabling multiple tooling with a single pane of glass. So if you're doing that yourself, you'd probably want to do something similar, because that allows us to ingest all the great intel that Matt's team come up with into the same place. We can enrich then for that context with what that tooling. So we certainly take that, a combination of the bigger players, the Microsofts, the Ciscos, the Splunks, the CrowdStrikes. We take the bigger players, and then we'll supplement that with niche capability who are really, really good at what they do, and balance, trade off the two. But then in order to make that viable, as I say, you need some element of a single pane of glass or a managed provider like ourselves to do that for you.
And we are seeing a consolidation, I must say, at the universities. I mean, the majority of the universities, I would say, are committed to Microsoft. It's just so common across the stack. We're seeing more and more of the universities move up from the A3 licenses to the A5, where they then have access to a good unified tool set. So although, absolutely we'll work with anything, I think we are seeing a move to that level of consolidation. It does enable you to then go, right, well, if I've got the full Microsoft stack, for example, I no longer need to worry about, maintain and look after this particular tool, this particular AV system, this particular monitoring system, whatever, because we have gone for that consolidation and simplification. Given the stresses that exist in all of the organizations we work with, but particularly within the academic community, there are constant financial pressures. Now, that can you manage more with less? I think is one of those answers. You're balancing your OPEX and your CAPEX, all of those challenges around the operationalization of the systems. So there are fabulous tools. Absolutely, there are out there that can help. There are really simple tools. To Natalie's point, mentioning the canary tokens. If you're not running a canary token of some sort on your network, you're missing a trick. It's a really high fidelity signal that somebody is doing something they shouldn't be doing if somebody taps and wakes up one of those canaries. It's so simple. It's so easy to install. It's so easy to manage. And most of them, you set them up and you forget about them until they sing. And when they sing, you've got something that you need to be working on. So there are lots of tools, lots of things out there that can and do help. But the consolidation is certainly something we're seeing in the academic community.
Yeah, and just a point from me, well, it doesn't directly answer the question because it's not a tool or a solution. Actually, if something that supplements all of this in cybersecurity in general is collaboration. I know there's a lot of universities that work as part of groups, but actually sharing the knowledge of incidents that may or may not happen, or sharing best practice across different institutes, goes a real long way. And certainly from an intelligence background, intelligence is useless unless we share it. So there's a lot to learn from the bad things that we've gone through, but also the good things as well. So wherever there is an opportunity to share information or intelligence or work together with whatever program of cybersecurity that you're going through, I would take advantage of it.
Thank you for answering all of my questions. We will now take some questions from the participants, and I can see that some of you have posted some really interesting questions. So The first one I would like the panelists to answer is, how can institutions overcome the limitations of their existing systems and digital infrastructure to make it a secure environment for all, to improve the security?
It comes down to that, doing the basics right to start with. Let's make sure your systems are patched. Let's make sure that if they do not need access from the internet, which is where the majority of these incidents will occur, if they don't need that internet access, take it away, hide it, put it inside the system, segment your network. There are some really fundamental, really basic things that we still see some organizations not have in place. But doing those things, the simplification of the network, the segmentation, the removal of stuff that's internet facing, and then keeping it patched and up to date. And Natalie, runs vulnerability management systems for a lot of organizations, helping them identify, are they vulnerable on the basis of the threat intelligence from Nat's team, and then helping organizations deal with that challenge. Because, if you're not constantly watching, if you're not constantly monitoring and seeing what's happening on your network, seeing how old is it, how out of date is it, how unpatched is it, you're not going to be in a position to respond to the threats that you are going to be facing. So let's get the basics right. Let's constantly do those. Let's simplify the identities. We see a lot of organizations within the academic world with multiple different logins, multiple different processes to get into a system. Let's simplify that. Let's make sure that multi-factor authentication is on everywhere. Just make that hurdle just that little bit harder for the bad guys to get past. Let's make sure it's operational, and be ready to deal with the challenges by getting the organization into as good a shape as possible. We're never, we know the academic community is never going to have all of the money that it wants. It's a pipe dream. So let's get the basics right and get them ready to do the right thing and be resilient as they can be.
I'd just pick up on a couple of things. I agree entirely. I think the interesting thing in the organisations that we look after, you absolutely don't expect them to chuck away what they've already got. It's always an evolution from where they are today. So if you haven't already, you're starting to think about a SIEM. So ingest the alerts that you have. Don't need to put in new capability and bring in the very best of the of a new suite of EDR, NDR, or any kind of tooling like that. You can ingest what you currently have, but then perhaps do some enrichment, some correlation, and then get additional value from the insight that you already have today. So I would, just start thinking about mapping that path out to use what you currently have. Later down the line, budgets exist. Yeah, you might want to just upgrade that to something different, but I would just start with supplementing and tweaking. And then, coming back to the point you made about vulnerability, there's always a balance between those two things. It's, the look at where your vulnerabilities are and prioritize. Again, you don't need to do everything. Something that is unpatched, but in a particular part of your network, actually might not be an issue. It might be something else that when you've looked at it, again, correlated it with two different things, that actually bumps that right up to the priority list. So I would just say, have a look at your risks, have a look at the prioritization, and then decide which is best for you. You don't have to do it all today, or all at once. You can go through that as budgets arise, and it's always worth just refreshing that, because something that was lower priority one day, you look at it a month later, another scan, 2 or 3 things have happened since then, and you might say, actually this needs to change. So that's where kind of a managed approach can be quite helpful, because you get that iterative insight, and whatever might be going on that just adds that additional piece that changes your priority. So they would be the couple of things I would add.
Thank you for that. Matt, would you like to add something?
I was just going to echo some of those things and perhaps repeat some of the things we've said already. So supplementing it by knowing what you're monitoring in the first place is a big part. I forget whether it was Tim or Natalie said earlier on, you can't protect the things you don't know about. So do an exercise where you find those things as well. I think it's really good to have a real clear picture of what you're your estate looks like, what those assets are, what that shadow IT might look like. And just to echo some of Tim's points around security fundamentals, security basics, through the work that I do, and I know the work that Tim does on a incident response point of view, those basics will stop the majority of attacks. If it's password spraying, you've got MFA in place, there's a good chance that that's going to mitigate those attacks from taking place. If you have good patch management, you're going to reduce the likelihood of those vulnerabilities being exploited as well. So yeah, just do the basics and know what you're protecting.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, how important is it to gather feedback from staff and students when implementing cybersecurity initiatives? Any thoughts on that?
I would do it first. Talk to them first, and listen and understand what their challenges are going to be when you try to roll it out. Sometimes you've got to be dictatorial. We are going to introduce MFA. It will be introduced as of Monday. Making sure you've got the staff that are ready to deal with the challenges that some of the people are going to face. So sometimes you've got to do that, but do try and engage. There is an awful lot of knowledge and experience within all of these organizations. So my suggestion, really strong suggestion, is talk to these people first. Try and get an understanding of the challenges they're going to face, so that as you introduce the good security measures, you've already got a mitigation in place. You've already got some way of, going back to my phrase, making it easy to do the right thing, such that you're not suddenly going to lock somebody out or present, damage their research, cause them a significant problem. So talk first, then get it right, get the communication right, and it might be one of those things that you roll out of term time. If you're trying to get all of your students to do something, well, get your staff, get the academics and the non-academic staff, get them sorted such that you sort of salami slice down the problem. You're not faced with everybody trying to switch all at once. Sometimes you'll have to, but let's make it easy on you to help them. And that'll be that part of the feedback, part of the communication, and getting it right.
We have time for one quick question. So it is, what impact does AI have on the cybersecurity landscape?
It's an interesting one. We've certainly seen the bad guys and girls start to use AI to help them. And we are definitely using AI to try and help defend our organization that we work with. So from that point of view, it's improved the bad guys, but it's improved the good guys too.
Thank you. That's all the time we have today. Thank you very much, Matt, Tim, and Natalie, for sharing your insights and making this a very engaging conversation. Thanks also to the participants for joining us today and contributing to the discussion. We'll share the post-event summary article and an on-demand recording of this webinar with you in the coming days. Thank you once again, and goodbye.